If you spend enough time in the deep wilderness, you start to realize something unsettled about the silence. We like to think the woods are empty, just trees, rocks, and wildlife. But any veteran ranger will tell you that the forest has eyes. Sometimes you are walking through a place that hasn't been touched by man in decades, only to realize you are not alone. Today, we are looking at two cases where the woods revealed secrets that were never meant to be found. Our first story takes us to the dense green canopy of the Arcata Community Forest in California. For Mark, a veteran forest ranger, these woods were his second home. He knew the topography, the trails, and the shadows better than anyone, or so he thought. It was a routine afternoon. Mark was trekking through a remote sector of the forest, marking trees for harvest. This was rugged terrain, dense brush, no footpaths. He hadn't set foot in this specific quadrant since 1985. It was the kind of place people simply didn't go. But as Mark pushed through a thicket, something caught his eye. Just past a wall of trees, a shape didn't look right. It was unnatural. Mark froze. He was 12 feet away before he even realized what he was looking at. It was a cabin, and it was perfectly camouflaged. This wasn't a pile of sticks or a lean-to thrown together by a transient. The structure was 12 feet wide and rose roughly 15 feet at its peak, complete with a peaked roof, a front porch, and an awning. It was built on a solid concrete foundation. Mark's mind raced. How do you haul bags of concrete, plywood, and tools into a roadless wilderness without leaving a single track? No broken branches, no litter, no trails. It was as if the cabin had simply grown out of the earth. Mark retreated and called for backup. This was illegal construction on public land, and in the deep woods, you never know who or what is waiting inside. He returned with a team, technicians Javier and Nick, and fellow ranger Heidi. Law enforcement had been notified and was en route, but the rangers needed to assess the scene first. They approached the structure, footsteps silent on the moss. The padlock on the door was heavy. They cut the lock. The door swung open. Heidi stepped forward, announcing their presence into the gloom. This is the Arcata Community Forest staff. If anyone is inside, make yourself known. Silence. They swept the room, expecting a drug lab or a fugitive's den. Instead, they found a home. The interior was immaculate. There were shelves stocked with canned food, housekeeping supplies, and a pot-bellied stove. A tea kettle sat on a coffee table next to a rocking chair, as if the occupant had just stepped out for a stroll. It was cozy, but it was the bookshelf that made the officers exchange a look. Among the titles on local flora was a copy of Catch Me If You Can. Whether it was coincidence or commentary, the title felt like a wink. They found a handwritten to-do list. Build bench, season cast irons, get stovepipe. They found a copy of a university newspaper from 2015. Someone had been living here, undetected, for years. But who? 2 driver's licenses were found, but they belonged to different people, possibly stolen, possibly discarded. No one could say for certain. The identity of the hermit remained a ghost. Mark and his team had no choice. They pinned an eviction notice to the door. It was a standard legal procedure, though they doubted anyone would actually see it. They were wrong. When the authorities returned a few weeks later to dismantle the illegal structure, they stopped dead in their tracks. The cabin was gone. Not demolished, gone. The occupant had returned, seen the notice, and completely deconstructed the house. They had hauled away the wood, the stove, the concrete, everything. The site was pristine. There wasn't a rusted nail or a gum wrapper left behind. Where the cabin once stood, there was only one thing left, a charcoal symbol drawn on the ground, a squatter's mark, a final signature. The Phantom of Arcata had vanished as silently as they had arrived, proving that if someone truly wants to disappear, the woods will always help them do it. In Arcata, the forest was used to hide a secret life. But 1,200 miles north, in the bitter cold of Idaho, the forest was being used to hide something far more terrifying, a tragedy in the making. It was November 2018, hunting season. 15-year-old Ryle Gordon and his stepfather Chris were heading to their cabin in Hayden, Idaho. This was their ritual, bonding over the silence of the woods, hoping to track a buck. Chris wanted Ryle to bag his first deer, but as they pulled their truck up to the trailhead, the silence was broken by chaos. Orange vests everywhere, search and rescue trucks, radios crackling with static. A search commander stopped them. A 19-year-old girl named Catherine Ogle had walked away from a nearby property and vanished into the tree line nearly 24 hours earlier. But this wasn't just a lost hiker scenario. Catherine had a developmental disability that significantly affected her ability to navigate unfamiliar situations on her own. She was alone, confused, and likely terrified, with a freezing night already behind her and another one closing in fast. The news hit Ryle hard. He knew these woods, he knew how quickly the temperature dropped at night. Chris and Ryle geared up. They still planned to head to their cabin, but the hunt was over. Now, they were scanning the brush for something else. They hiked deep into the timber, eyes on the ground for any sign of disturbance. Hours passed. Nothing but pine needles and dirt. Then Ryle stopped. "Chris, look." He pointed to a patch of disturbed earth on the trail. Scrawled clumsily into the dirt were 4 letters, H-E-L-P. The hair on Chris's arms stood up. He was an experienced hunter. His logical brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a joke? Maybe another hunter had written it as a gag, but Ryle shook his head. No, it's her. The desperation in those letters was clear. Catherine was alive, and she was lucid enough to leave a sign. They sprinted back to the search party. The discovery re-energized the rescue effort. A helicopter was scrambled, chopping through the air, scanning the canopy with thermal cameras. Search teams fanned out across the expanded grid. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the temperature plummeted. The helicopter lost visibility and had to pull back. The ground teams retreated to staging areas to wait for dawn. The official effort had stalled, but Chris and Ryle couldn't sit still. They had a gut feeling. There was an area near their own cabin, a sector the teams hadn't fully cleared yet. If Catherine had been moving through the woods, she could have stumbled onto their property. Using flashlights to cut through the blackness, the two hiked to their cabin. The door was unlocked. A chair was moved. Someone had been here. They stepped back out onto the porch. The wind howled through the trees. Chris killed the flashlights. "Quiet," he whispered. "Listen." They yelled out her name. "Catherine." Silence. "Catherine." They killed their own movement, straining their ears against the ambient noise of the forest. Then, a sound. Faint. Fragile. "Hello?" It came from the darkness, not far away. Adrenaline surged. They followed the voice, pushing through the brush until their flashlight beams hit a shape nestled between 2 large trees. Catherine had wrapped herself in a sleeping bag she had found in the cabin. She was cold, shaken, and overwhelmed by the lights, but she was alive. Chris and Ryle radioed it in. The nightmare was over. Catherine was transported to the Kootenay Health Center, where she made a full recovery. The media hailed Chris and Ryle as heroes. Dozens of trained searchers, a helicopter with thermal imaging, a full grid operation, and it was a 15-year-old kid and his stepfather who brought her home. But if you ask them, they weren't heroes. They just happened to be the only ones who stopped to look down. One person left a charcoal symbol on bare ground. Another scratched 4 letters into the dirt. 2 messages, 2 very different reasons. One to say goodbye, the other to beg for help. The woods don't care who you are or why you're there. They just keep your secrets until someone knows where to look. If these stories stayed with you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more tales from the deep woods, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there.